Mm. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shavi'is, Perek Hey, Halacha Gimel, and moving on today into Halacha Daled, which is the final halacha of this Perek. We're learning today Daf Mem. We left off on Daf Mem Amud Aleph all the way on top of the Amid, and we began learning in Halacha Gimel the sugya of Lifnei Iver. And basically, what the Gemara will point out, as it will explain the Mishnah, that even though there is an Isser of Lifnei Iver Loisitim Michshel, but we don't say that you're over lifnei on lifnei. In other words, like the Mishnah gave an example, that I'm not allowed to sell or loan an implement that's exclusively used to work the land to a person who's chashad al hashvius lifnei iver leisitem michshel. I am allowed to sell those implements to a goy. Maybe the goy then will lend it or sell it to the Jew. That's called lifnei. The lifnei, we're not chayish for until that point. I just want to say on the side that not only just a chazer, that we have a machloikis rishonim, whether we make this chiluk between lifnei iver and misayeh lo ivre aveda. It's all relevant to this Mishnah. Keshitas toisves, beferish. Versus, let's say, Shitas Rambam, the way at least when we learned the Rambam together, that's the way we understood it a few times from the Rambam. The Rambam makes no such differentiation. In other words, even if the person would be able to get an implement without me selling it to him, he'll be, and if he, God forbid, if he's violating Shvius anyways, he'll do so anyways. Nevertheless, I am not allowed to sell him the implement. And if I do so, I'm over the oiraisa of Lifnei Iver Leisitim Michshel. Aside of that, there's another big discussion that the Rebbe also mentions regarding Lifnei Iver Leisitim Michshel, whether Lifnei is a lav bifnei atzmai, and it's a lav klali connected to all of the mitzvahs, or every mitzvah has in it also a part. Not only am I not allowed to violate a certain commandment, but I can't even somehow help, in a negative way, another Jew violate that commandment. You understand? In other words, either I have to put on tefillin. I'm not allowed to be Mechal Shabbos. That's a mitzvah. And then there's a separate mitzvah. But again, all the mitzvahs, Lifnei Iver. Or part of me keeping Shabbos, part of me not violating Shabbos is for me to make sure that I do not do something that will somehow help another Jew be Mechal Shabbos. L'may nafkamina, whether Lifnei is a prat of each mitzvah or whether it's a mitzvah klali, are you chayiv to be Moiser Nefesh, let's say, just as an example, for the three big ones, for Lifnei Iver? It was if Lifnei Iver is a detail of thou shalt not murder, then just like a person has to go al Kiddush Hashem not to murder, or not to commit adultery, or not to serve Avodah Zarah, then I have to also be Moiser Nefesh when it comes to the Lifnei Iver on those three, if they are extensions of those three. If Lifnei Iver is an Inyan Klali Bifnei Atzmai, of course it's applicable to all of the Taryag mitzvahs. But Lifnei is an Isur of Lifnei Iver, then it's a lav like any other lav for which there's no obligation to be Moiser Nefesh, right? Unless there are certain circumstances that we actually just learned a few daf ago. Just a good thing to keep in mind when it comes to the Lifnei Iver. Now, the Gemara is going to go back to the machlokes we had in the Mishnah between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel regarding selling a para choyreshes, which means a cow that was trained to plow, to someone who's suspect to working his land on Shvius on the Shvius year. And Beis Shammai indeed says, Lo yimkar loy para choyreshes to the chashut. And Beis Hillel is matir. Why is Beis Hillel matir? The cow, was speaking about a para choyreshes, so quoting the words of Beis Hillel, B'pnei shehu yachal l'shachta. Even though the cow was trained to plow, there is always the possibility when you have to eat, you have to eat. A cow also has a dual use. Cow can be used to shecht. You can shecht a cow, you can shecht an ox. Shechting and eating is completely mutter on the Shvi here. So we can say that the seller can say, even though I'm selling it, the guy is a chashud, as far as I am concerned, he's buying it to shecht it. Now this, when I said Bava Mitzia yesterday, I made a mistake. It's Bava Basra. It's mamish in the beginning of Perek HaMoichedes HaPeiros. Bavli Bava Basra Daf Tzadik Beis. We will actually read a shtikla Gemara in Bava Basra Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Very similar. I know we are learning Dinei Yisura, and the parallel will be from Dinei Mamayna. And we know that Yisura Mimamayna Lo Yalfinon, both ways. We know that. Nevertheless, there's a big parallel. And again, we're going to read the sugya as it presents itself in the Bavli. It's quick, and we're going to read the way it's presented in the Yerushalmi. There's always nuanced differences, perhaps foundational differences, and that will be a big part of today's daf. We will also also speak a little bit about another machloikas Rav and Shmuel when it comes to yovel. Now, guys, if I sell ancestral land, remember that? In other words, land that originally came into my family, my ancestors, from the original division that Yeshua affected when we entered the Holy Land. And it was passed down. So if I have such ancestral land, if I sell it, the general rule is the land reverts back to its original owner. During the Yovel year, question is, what happens if such a land is sold on the Yovel year? What happens then? There's going to be a Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, also related to the Machlokes Rav and Shmuel that we have in Bavli Bava Basra Tzadik Beis regarding Dina de Mamoina, when you sell a cow, whether it is for plowing, whether it is for eating, all connected to this topic. That will be the sugya up until Halacha Dalit, and Halacha Dalit, Daf Mem Amid Beis, again, the last Mishnah in this Perek will be a continuation to the sugya of Lifnei Iver, but instead of speaking about utensils that are used for plowing or for working the land, we're going to be speaking about certain household utensils that is used to prepare food. Same concept. Am I allowed to lend it or sell it to a balabasta, to someone who is chashud that they are eating peiroi shvius after the zman of biur? In other words, there is a time in the Shemitah year that food items may not be consumed if a person did not do biur, right? Or let Rabbi Yehuda, like we just learned a few daf ago, the person did biur, but only the ani is allowed to take it, even according to the Ramban's understanding, but this person is chashud that he took it back. Same concept, lifnei iver le'sitin michshel. What am I allowed to lend? What am I not allowed to lend? Again, when there's going to be an item that has a dual purpose, there is a makom to be lenient, because the person, the lender, can say the recipient who doesn't keep Shemitah yet, doesn't keep Shvius yet, will use it for the permissible use. And as the Mishnah points out beautifully, that there are going to be many leniencies. And v'kulam lo yamru ela mipnei darkei shalom. In other words, to promote harmony, we purposefully, it's not that we are makel for dinei Shvius, but we're machmir for Avos Yisrael, as we will see the sugya. Chavra, let's start Daf Mem Amud Aleph all the way on top of the Amud. Okay, so like we said, lifnei to lifnei is not a problem, and therefore the Mishnah says that moicher legoyim ba'aretz, a potter can sell large quantities of pots to a goy, pottery of oil, pottery of wine, and what? Meaning the chiddush is I can sell it to a yid also, even to the chashud, as we mentioned, up until a certain amount. Even if it's more than the numbers the Mishnah gave, which was for oil 5 and for wine 15, and we don't have to be concerned that the guy will sell it to a yid, which might happen. But that's called lifnei or lifnei. Also says the Mishnah that I am allowed to sell it to a yid b'chutz la'aretz. Now, what's the chiddush over there? I know it's the same idea that we're not chayish that the Yisrael b'chutz la'aretz will resell it to a chashud in Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara adds something that's maybe difficult to understand. Maybe let's be open to understand it. Vafilu min hakonoi ba'aretz. Even there's a chiddush here. The chiddush here is that if the jugs that this person is selling to a Yisrael b'chutz la'aretz, the jugs come from a stock of jugs that were made in the Holy Land, and apparently in our Gemara, the Gemara is trying to say that something that originated in the Holy Land will higher chance it's going to end up back in the Holy Land. Just look at Yakir. It's interesting. So in other words, you would think that you're selling it to Yisrael, but it's jugs made in Israel. So there's a higher chance he's going to sell it back to the Toishvei Eretz Yisrael. So the point is, Enachanami, he might do that. I am not mitzuva on lifnei before the lifnei. The problem of lifnei is one step prior to the sin, not 2 steps prior to the sin. And it makes sense, if the people are habituated to different qualities. When I was younger, the soap and shampoo of Bnei Eretz Yisrael just smelled different. I didn't like it. And Mastama, they loved it. They were used to it. They grew up on it. So if someone were to buy from China a big lot of soap and shampoo that were made for Israelis, he would sell it to Israel because no one else would buy it. Maybe the same thing was with the pottery. All right. Anyways, I'm just poking fun at Yakir because he's on mute and I get to talk. All right. That's just called the brotherly teasing. Weiter. So here we start. So here we have a machlekes. Again, the parach chayreshes is clear. Parach chayreshes, guys, is a cow or an ox that was trained to plow. That means that it's beroiv, used to plow. And we already established that I am not allowed to sell to a chashud ala shvis an implement, in this case, a living implement, that is made to be used for a malacha asura b'shvis, lifnei iver loisitin michshol, which is taka why by Shammai says you're not allowed to sell it to him. And the chiddush of Beis Hillel is that since a cow was also slaughterable, in other words, since the buyer, who is a chashud, doesn't have to use it to plow, he can use it to eat it, you are allowed to do it. So says the Gemara Tanei. Now, guys, in the Bavli, whenever we introduce Tanei, Tanu Rabbanon, Tanan, Tanya, it's Amoraim quoting Tanoim. That's a klal. And, Tanan is a Mishnah, Tanya is a Braisa, Tanu Rabbanon is a Braisa, Tanina is a Braisa. For me, the siman is that whenever it ends with an aleph, it's a Braisa. Right? So Tanya ends with an aleph, is a Braisa. Tanu Rabbanon would be the exception. Tanan is a Mishnah. Anyways, here in the Yerushalmi, they viewed the greater leaders of Israel as Tanoim, even if they were Amoraim. So if you look inside the Marafulda, the top line, Tanei, we're not quoting a Braisa here. Look at the top, this is beautiful. Tanei, Hoyel v'Rav u'Shmuel hein de pligi. Now Rav and Shmuel are the earlier Amoraim, first generation Amoraim. Rav Tanu Upalik. So Amar Tanei u'Mishum de Gedoyle Yisrael heim u'Keilu heim hatanoim de Braisa. So therefore, v'chein derech hashas hazeh. See clear. He points out that one of the differences in language between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi is that in the Bavli you will not use the word Tanei. You know how you introduce a you remember in the Bavli when you introduce a machlokes amoraim, a discussion of Abraham, you say itmar, and there's a lot of kabbalah on that. Elazar vi isamar, isamar is itmar. There's zoyers, there's a zoyer on that. I don't remember the pratim. So itamar, Yakir is thinking. It's interesting. But itmar is amoraim. Tane is tanoim. In the Yerushalmi, it doesn't go that way. But he points out they have to be Gedoyle Yisrael. I don't know what he means because the truth is that Rav and Shmuel were mamish the leaders of their era of the Amoraim. So maybe the other Amoraim looked up to them the way we look up at Tanoim. Okay, anyways, back over here. So what's the topic? The topic of Dinim Amoina. Hamoicher shoyer lachaveira v'nimtza nakchon. So Chavra, I know that the sugya of a shoyer nakchon is in Bava Kama, but it doesn't matter. When I buy an ox, if the ox has a violent nature, but not, this is key, not that it acquired or it assumed a violent nature after it was purchased. See, if an ox was docile, if that's the word, if an ox was calm, and after I bought it, mitamol, the ox is violent, that's on me. That's because my animals reflect my nature, mamish. I can have no kindness to the seller. The seller will tell me, of course the ox is wild. You're a wild animal. But if I can prove, I'm the buyer, that the ox was always a shoyer nakchon. In other words, the ox had a violent nature before, I just never knew about it. Now, he never lied to me by telling me it's calm, but he never told me the truth.
But Rabbi Zions, yes. Isn't a shoyer nakchon gets that title after a tra?
So when it comes to whether he's chayiv nezek shalom or not, there has to be a 3 or 4 time repetition. Remember, it's on the third time or on the fourth time. And if I'm not mistaken, Yakir, that when an ox is sold, the new owner has to undergo himself the 3 or 4 times because of the shinui ba'alim. Minigeya, whether the owner's chayiv, chatzi, nezek, or nezek shalom. Don't confuse it. But regarding our topic is a down-to-earth topic. It's called mekach tos. That means when I buy an animal, even though I wasn't lied, but information was withheld. And guys, withholding information is a lie. And it's a big difference for me, the new owner. I had the right to know that I am buying an ox that has a violent nature. Let me add another layer. That the buyer has a taina, I should have been notified that the ox was already violent in nature. If the current buyer bought it to work with it. In Bavli, we use the words leradia. The words that we have over here is lacharisha in the Yerushalmi. Because I want to work with it. It's so much harder to work with an ox that has a violent nature. If the buyer bought it for shchita, that's the premise of this topic, then withholding that information doesn't matter. Because l'may nafkamina to you, al pi Kabbalah, we know that if the ox has a violent nature, the eater of the steak will become violent. Okay, ad kedei kach, we don't go.
It's like I was asking about that.
Everyone holds
mitzad apirsul, mitzad publicity, because sure more everybody knows. So what's the time of the guy you say of
in other words, clearly we see over here, Yakir, that the due diligence doesn't have to go to this detail. I mean, that's really, maybe, or let me word it, you're saying good. On whom was the onus? Machlekes Rav and Shmuel. Rav Amar, that mekach tosu. Pashut. In other words, now I want to just add words. I'm going to read the Bavli because we have time. Rav follows the Roiv. This is one of the sources in the Bavli where we have these words. Shmuel says that ein holchin b'mamayin achar haroiv. Shmuel, Rav says, Roiv people buy oxen for plowing. You know when people shecht it? When the ox is already an old, alta ox, it can't plow anymore. You shecht it. That's what Americans do with older people. You use them and then you shecht them. Put them in an old age home. Get rid of them. Make money of them. Oh. So Bekitzer, it's called a mekach tos. Shmuel Amar, no. Yachal hu meimar lei. The seller can tell the buyer, I did not withhold relevant information. If you would have asked me, I would have told you. I was not chayiv to tell you. I'm not chayiv to tell you. Why? As far as I am concerned, my mindset, the seller says, was l'shchita macharti v'loch. I sold it to you for shchita. As far as shchita is concerned, there is no difference whether it's violent or not. It will make no difference. The meat will taste the same. Now, here, guys, I'm just reading a few lines and just reminding everyone that we're learning the Rashbam. If we're going to learn the Rashbam, just to get familiar with the words. I just want to read the words on the Bavli for you to see how the words are different, and also the content here will be more developed. So Itmar, you see, Tani, Itmar. Amoicher shel chaver evrim sanag chan Rav Amar mekach tos, Shmuel Amar yacholu loim eloi shchita macharti lach. Fragt the Gemara in the Bavli, Bava Basra Tzadik Beis Amad Aleph, v'lechse, let us see, igavra de zavin linachasta, if the person is a person who's a tabach, nechasta is a tabach, if the guy is a butcher, then everyone should agree that the presumption of the seller, rightfully so, is linachasta. Ilaradia, if the buyer is a person that has plowing, rodeo comes from this word. That means he works with animals, then laradia. So let us see from the occupation of the buyer, that should be the premise of what the seller was chayiv to divulge and what he was allowed to withhold. Beautiful. So answers the Gemara, it must be begavra de zavin lahachalachem. Next kasha in the Bavli is, let's see from the money that he paid. Why don't we establish from the money? It's amazing what it was bought for. Back and forth, and I'm going to skip a lot of back and forth, and I'm turning to the Tzadik Beis Amud Beis. I just want to read the words. So at the end is, the words of Roiv is in the Bavli. Rav Amar, mekach tos basar ruba oslinan, veruba leradya zavnei. Shmuel Amar, ki oslinon basar ruba be'isura. B'mamoina loy. Two dots. Tzadik Beis and Beis in the Bavli. These words we're not going to find here. We're going to find some of the back and forth equal and a new back and forth with different oisias. Now, back in the Yerushalmi. What are we dealing with? Same concept. If the buyer is an aris, in other words, this is a person who buys oxen to plow land. It doesn't have to mean aris that he can't be the balabas. It means someone who works the land. If my job is to work the land, and you need to have oxen to work land, such a person who buys, you buy a tractor. Are you buying it for its parts? If I'm a farmer, I'm buying it to farm my field. Like you can from the buyer, the seller was chayiv to inform. Withholding is disingenuous. Mekachtos. Then it says the Gemara, same thing in the opposite. If the buyer is a butcher, then butchers used to be the ones who bought the animals then. So divrei hakol l'shchitamach. Ki nan kaimen. These are the words in the Yerushalmi. So in the Bavli we had the words. He does both. Here in the Yerushalmi, same idea. The Yerushalmi says b'shemachore l'sarsur. Sarsur is a middleman. The guy that's buying it deals with animals. The middleman is buying it to resell. Oh. So therefore, from his profession, it's for everything. Rav Omar Mekachtosu. Now, the Yerushalmi doesn't say why. Why Mekachtos? He's doing it for both. The words of the Bavli, let's put the words of the Bavli in the Yerushalmi. Because Roiv, even though the middleman buys animals to resell to farmers, to resell to butchers, doesn't matter. Since Roiv oxen are bought, the majority are bought for plowing, so Basaruba, a statistical majority, Eruba de Lesa Kaman. Shmuel Amar, no, Yachol Hu Meimar, that the seller can say, don't nullify the sale, that I sold it to you for shchita. The shchita macharti loch. Now, before we show how there's a parallel, l'chu'ura parallel, a superficial parallel, which might be problematic, between Rav and Shmuel and Beishamai and Beisilal, which we will never like because we don't want for anyone to have to side with Beishamai, before we get there, the Gemara is going to ask that this apparent machloikis appears to contradict themselves in the topic of Yovel. That fragt the Gemara mechalfa shitasi de Rav and mechalfa shitasi de Shmuel. They appear to reverse their own opinion. The is palgun, they argue elsewhere, like we spoke out in the words of introduction, that when it comes to selling ancestral land prior to the year of Yovel, bismancha Yovel noyik. Simple. The land reverts back to the owner's guys when? On Yom Kippur. Finish. What happens if there's a sale that happened on the 50th year? So let me tell you what's vadai. No one will say, the sale was on this Yovel, it only goes back next Yovel. No one says that. What is the question? Whether the sale took hold for a moment and then Yovel kicked in, or the sale never took place. Lamai nafkaminu, who gets to keep the money? Lamai nafkaminu, who gets to keep the money? If the sale was a sale, then the seller keeps the money. Fact that the trader right away reverted the field back to him, thank you God. If Yovel doesn't allow the sale to happen, then the money has to go back to the buyer.
Rabbi, so
Yes.
the sale become a final sale by the Mashiach of the money, right?
So like this. So when it comes to karka, we have a mishnais and kedushin. What are the three ways that you buy karka? Bekesef, b'shtar, u'bechazak. So, very good. One of them, midai raisa, will be kesef, or a shtar, or a chazak. Doesn't matter. The point is, you made a kinyan, whatever the kinyan is. So let's read it inside. Rav Amar. It's beautiful. The sale is effective. Kono. Narvas then, it's on Yovel. So v'yoytze miyodei b'yovel, it's right away. It's an immediate step. The sale lasts for a fleeting moment. But you know what? The Gemara does, the Yerushalmi is mekatzev. The money belongs to the seller. The sale is a sale. The trader right away says, you sold it. goes back on the Yovel year, I'm a chaya to the seller. Aber Shmuel says, B'chlal lo ikana. There's no sale to begin with. And therefore, the money has to go back to the buyer. All right, now the Gemara fears Zois. What's the contradiction? It's obvious. Mefrek the Gemara, let's go. Rav and Shmuel. Mechalfa shetasi de Rav. Taman who Aimer, Taman means over there in Yovel, because this topic the Bnei Yeshiva had when they were learning the sugya of Bava Basra, when they were learning the sugya of Kinyanim. This is before the topic of Shviz. See, this is much better. This is Mamaina and Mamaina. Okay, that wa Taman who Aimer, over there Rav says Kana. Now let me ask you a question. Would the majority of the people buy a field just for a moment? No. Is it possible that someone buys a field just, it could be. Yakir is asking, why is such a thing even a possibility? Are there even a minority of people? Let's go, what comes to my mind, right? That the only person who can write a prusbul is someone who owns land, right? So maybe, now we have to know about, again, when does prusbul, when is Shemitah Meshamet, when is Yovel Meshamet, the beginning and the end? There's certain, like that's a din. For certain things to take effect, I have to be a landowner. A man gave kedushin to a woman, almanas, that this field is mine. For him, it's worth it to own the field for a fleeting moment. In order for, before he got married, he thinks he wants to be married to her. He doesn't know yet. Or whatever. Okay. Danny's looking at me. I said that to you, Danny. You're good. You're in a good place. Here's a chaim. It's good for the kinder. Now, the car, so because Rav, when Rav says that Rav doesn't care about most people. Most people won't do that. And we have to add all of this. In other words, we're using this because in the Bavli, the Gemara says explicitly, she tosik the Rav is that he follows majority when it comes to Dinah de Mamoina. Based on that, does he follow Rav? Does he not follow Rav? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you the answer. Over here, here's the Vart. See, there's a whole different thing. Everyone knows it's Yovel. My friends, I'm sorry. Mekachtos means there is new information that had I known, you knew. And many times you can't plead ignorance. I didn't know the halacha. I didn't know. Shigagas, Talmud, Oile Zodin. That's a good example. You needed to know. Over here, it's a mekachtos. Here, you don't know what type of ox it is. I want you to know, Stam, ox.
What if someone didn't know the halacha of Yovel?
So that's why I said Shigagas, Talmud, Oile Zodin. That's a good example where a person cannot claim I was ignorant. Should have learned Rambam. The Rebbe's takana, he would have known. I don't know. Should have learned the Gemara. Should have learned Chumash. Learn Chumash, but he doesn't know Yovel.
No, but is that the explanation on the other opinion that says that there's no sale? You would say that.
No. Let's see in a moment. When it comes to Shmuel in a moment. Now, okay, I want to step back. I think Shmuel's opinion is no sale is a halachic issue, not a mekachtos issue. In other words, if Yovel has so much koyach to bring things back to where they originally came from, that even if it already exchanged dominiums, it reverts back. If it has such a power, is kal v'chomer, it has the power not to allow it to leave my possession to begin with. Madach, if it already left my possession 49 years ago, it comes back to me. So of course, it will stop it from leaving my possession. It's a halacha. There was no sale. Yovel, everything goes back to the original owners. Your sale is ineffective. You can't sell it. Can't do it.
What's the circumstance? Was the sale, didn't it happen before Yovel?
No, it happened during the year of Yovel. That's their machlokes.
Oh, during Yovel.
That's it. You need coffee, Danny. Or I need to speak clearer, one of the two. Or both. Okay. Mechalfa shitasi de Shmuel. What's the kasha? What's the contradiction? Taman hu amar. This is so geshmak. Taman again is in Yovel. When in the din of Yom, he said loikana. Why loikana? Guys, let's go with Roiv. Let's go with the same Roiv. Because most people, okay, very good. Not what I said. I delete what I said. The premise of the question is based on the understanding that Shmuel is following Roiv. Most people don't buy a field just for a moment. So we follow the Roiv. But v'cha Amar, but here, when it comes to the sale of the now discovered already violent ox, v'cha Amar kanem. Answers the Gemara. Why by Mamoina lo hilchin and basaroy? Answers the Gemara. Let's go to the field. By the field, even though I gave a couple of very far-fetched hechetimses that a minority of the people would want, the Gemara's answer for Shmuel Yakir is, you don't even have a minority. People buy land to plant the land. If you can't plant the land because it goes back to the owner, no one would have bought it. It was for sure bought on an erroneous premise. You don't even have a minority. Shmuel looks at the minority. He gives chashivus to the minority like 50-50. But there isn't even a minority. But over here, there is a minority. But beautiful. Now that we resolved Rav and Shmuel and we are standing the ground, that's the key. Rav follows Roiv. Shmuel gives credence to a small possibility as an equal possibility, which now allows us to maneuver a lot easier. So now we have a problem. It's going to come out in our Mishnah. Rav holds like Beis Shammai. Only Shmuel holds like Beis Hillel. When we speak, and don't forget that our Mishnah is speaking about selling a parah choreshes. Parah choreshes. Now it's in the opposite. Beis Hillel is matir in the lenient, because he says even though it's a parah choreshes, roiv, most people use a parah choreshes to do charisha, but people buy it l'shchita. So we don't look at it the roiv miyut. There are two equal possibilities, and by the way, that's not the only. When the Mishnah said that if you have the saw measure is used to measure grain for storage, which you're not allowed to do on shvius. So measure is used when you're preparing food. We already established in the Mishnah that if something can be used lehetet or leisa, the Mishnah says it's Zajac klal, then you can sell it. It becomes a 50-50. It's beautiful. The problem will be is Rav holds like Beis Shammai. So the Gemara, look at guys the lashon of the Yerushalmi. Even though Amoide, that we would say it l'chuura or superficially. Rav holds like Beis Shammai. No, go deeper. Says the Gemara, I'll tell you. Really, Rav can go like Beis Hillel. What does Beis Hillel say? That could be this guy bought it l'shchita. Okay. Now let me tell you something. Even when you buy something l'shchita, now we're going into another detail. Even when you buy something to shchita, do you think that this guy might not use it a little bit? Now, I want to add something. In the Sugya Bava Basra, you did not buy a parah choreshes. You bought a ox stam. A tabach who buys an ox, the tabach might not even own land. He'll shecht it right away. I'm not worried about Bava Basra. Here, the difference between here and Bava Basra is that the Mishnah introduced the words of Beis Shammai. I'm reading Beis Shammai oimrim lo yimker loy parah choreshes. So even if the person bought it to eat, since it is a parah choreshes, you're selling it to a Jew that works his land on shvius. Even if he buys it l'shchita, why do you think he might not use it chaparain and use it to give up sagut plow? Leis, urcha, mashan, tolos, and yoimin, is it not normal? People don't buy something for shechita and right away shecht it. It's fresh. Faket, to shecht it, you want to, in those days for sure, you want to have buyers to buy every shtickle of the meat before you sell it. There's no refrigeration. You don't buy it and shecht it. You buy it and you hold on to it. That's beautiful. Daf mem amid beis. Look inside, before we turn over, that's the way the Pnei Moshe learns the Gemara. Look inside the bottom, 3 lines from the bottom. Yeah, he bought it for a shechting. Or even less than 30 days. Gewaldig. That's it. Daf mem amid beis. And therefore, the Yasein to Lasehei Yomaya v'loy mekachtos. Now, how do you resolve that over there in Bava Basra? I'll tell you how we resolve it in Bava Basra. You know what Rav is saying? Not just that this guy bought it l'radya. Even if he bought it l'shchita, If the ox is wild, the buyer can say, you needed to inform me. See, this detail we didn't have on Bava Basra, in the Bible. Even if we're going to say that we give credence to the possibility that what? That the buyer bought it l'shchita. It's a minority. Let's go that Rav also agrees that by Memoina you don't follow Roiv. Lo yozrinon b'Memoina basaruba. Rav can even subscribe to that. That's a new layer. Okay, 50-50. If he bought it, Laradia, the guy has a taina. You should have told me that it's a wild ox. It's violent. It's going to be hard to work with it. Even if I bought it for shchita, I'm not chayiv to buy something and to shecht it this second. Even for shchita, I keep it with me a little bit. I don't want to buy l'shchita something that's going to be wild. Beautiful. This you don't have over there. That's why Rav says it's a mekach tos. Now let's go in the opposite direction. Now you have to explain Shmuel now. Shmuel Amike Beis Hillel, even though superficially you're right, Shmuel holds like Beis Hillel, I'll tell you better. Now this was not necessary, but it's the emes. That even if Shmuel were to hold like Beis Shammai over here says that you're not allowed to sell a parah chayreshes. I'll tell you, that's simple. A parah chayreshes is something that people don't shecht. It's a bad financial decision. In Bava Basra, no one knows what the cow is. No one informed themselves of what the cow is. So Shmuel says it's not a mekach tos. Because the seller says, I was chayiv to give you information that, in my opinion, was not relevant. Why is it not relevant? Because as far as I am concerned, you bought it for shechting. But over here, you know it's a parah chayreshes. So when you sell a parah chayreshes to a person who's chashad ala shviz, even Shmuel will be moidem. Leis urcha devar nosha. It's not common for a person. Mikus means to shecht. To shecht a Torah that is trained l'radia. So really, it's completely disconnected. Oy, Gewalt, it's getting late. Let's go by it.
Are we trying to get Shmuel to be like Beis Shammai?
We don't have. We're just trying to point out to completely disentangle. There's a pure birudim. Don't link one with the other. That's it. At kedei kach. We know it was okay. Now, what we accomplished is this top line on Daf Mem Amud Beis. This is a line that we don't have in the. You can say it's a machlokes Bavel Yerushalmi in the understanding of Shitas Rav. Okay, and like we mentioned, because a person can use this measure leheter uleiser, and even though lifnei iver is only if it's leiser, if it's leheter uleiser, you're good to go. Now, what happens if I lend you my measuring cup, and you meaning a Jew that's chashud, and I witness the Jew that's chashud that he is currently using it leiser? Am I obligated now to take it back from him? That's the question. So says the Gemara Rab Acha, or in the name of Rav Tanchum Bar Chia, in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that if Yishaloi Sa'asoi, as the Mishnah says, you are allowed to, and it turned out that the borrower is using it le'isr. Moided means he's using the cup to measure grain for storage, which is something that you are not allowed to do. So he's saying, once it's already happening, you're not obligated, mitzad lifnei iver, to demand it back. Goes without saying, because of Abbas Yisrael, I have a responsibility to inspire my neighbor to keep the mitzvahs. No question. But we're speaking about, once I did something beheter, I don't say, ooh, now that I see what you're using it for, give it back to me. You don't have to do that. And that is when you land it. And kol shchein b'maskiroloi, if I rented it out, and if I would be mechuyev to retrieve it, I would have to give him back his money. There would be a money loss. For sure, I don't have to lose money. But it's not about the money. Beautiful. Elama, like we said, we have a mitzvah to inspire our fellow Jews to keep all the mitzvahs. Now, let's go as far as we could, guys. We took too much time. The next Mishnah is a hemshich to the first Mishnah. We're not speaking about implements that work the land. We're speaking about implements that are used in the cooking or baking of food. What's the issue with shvis? Let's go. The Marav Fulda gives a hechet timsa, that you have grain after the Zman HaBiur. Now, of course, a Jew, I can have grain from last year. I can have grain from the 5th year. No problem. But if you have a Yid that's known that they don't care about Shemitah, and therefore they also make food from a product that we are not allowed to own, can I lend to such a household utensils that make food? So says the Mishnah, you could. Mashelas isha lachaver tahachshud al shvius. A nafa sifter. Sifter is for for flour. A kavada, which is a sieve is for kernels. Rechayim, some sort of hand mill. We're speaking about in the household food making utensils. V'tanur and a tanur. The Gemara, let's see how far we can get. The Gemara says Gavaldik. Why? Why are you allowed to? Because every one of them could be used for something completely not food related. The Marafulda gives an introduction. The nafa, the sifter, could be used if you want to count money on a surface. So you take the nafa, you can use it to count money on top of it. It's a very small possibility. We're stretching the heter. Since it could be used for something that's mutter, you can do that.
So if you're going to use it for non-kosher food, you can give it to them as well?
Same idea. Because it has another purpose, even though it's really not its main purpose. Elama, that's when it comes to lending the utensil. But to actually work with them, but don't grind with them on shvius. Do not do that. Why? Because they might be using food that's zman biur food. That's called lifnei iver or misayeya. Now, weiter. Isha schaver mi ingen leingen ma iso ingen. What happens if you remember, guys? We're going back a few masechtas. Isha schaver mishaelis le isha samaaretz. The issue over here is you're being metame food, a nafa or a kavara. You can do that. Not only that, but even more than that. Up until when you mix the water with the flour, you can actually work with her, right? Maybe the food is demai. That's mesechtas demai. We can say roiv amaaretz from asrim if you remember. Roiv, the takana that they made was because there was a substantial minority. But when it comes to promoting the peace between neighbors, which is the goal of all of this, who says that the food that they're making is not mu'usir? Maybe they were ma'asir. Maybe it's not demai. But with tuman kara, you can't say that. The moment the water is added to the flour, here, yes, stam ha'ma'aretz has a din as tamei. And what's the issue with being metama chul and chavre? Remember, because of challah, we learned this. That you can't do already. Here, loisiga etzla. Because already she'ed machzikim yidei oivri avera. Now, why are we so lenient? Why are we saying, you're kidding? You're a sifter? You can lend a sifter to someone who's chashud that they're eating food achar zman abiyur? Why? Because they might be able to use it as a money counter table? Come on. So I'll tell you why we're looking to be lenient. And once we speak about darkei shalom, we're going to learn about other practices that we are very lenient, not because we are lenient, we are machmir in darkei shalom, which is, you can lend support. The Gemara will clarify the meaning of lending support. It's verbally, giving words that lend support to a goy that's working the land on shvius, because he's not bound by the laws of shvius, avaloi yidei Yisrael. But do not offer whatever the machzikim means. As we'll learn in the Gemara, you can't do that to a Jew that's working the land on shvius. There's another type of being machzik, and that's called v'shay alam b'shleiman. There's like a guy is working, you tell him, may you have an easy day. You're lending support to the work, and v'shay alam b'shleiman means, in English, how are you? You can do that to a goy, b'pnei darkei shalom, more to be elaborated in the Mishnah. I know, guys, one more line. Danny, I want to go to the end of the Amma because it's going to be end of the Seif. Now, Rab Zeira, boy, kumer Rav Mana, masnisa b'stam, I want to make it clear. When am I allowed to be lenient? And I'm allowed to be mashel to a isha hachashuda ala shviz, a nafa, etc. That's b'stam. That's because my neighbor did not tell me, can you please lend me the sifter for me to sift through? She just said, I need a sift. She didn't say for what. The moment the Isha that's Chashud al Ashviyah says, b'mefaresh, the moment she says for what purpose she needs it, then you can't do that. You understand? You can't say, they have no nemanus. Lekula, that you can't do. Amalei, ustamai lafke beferushay. Come on. Even if they were not mefaresh, what are you going to use a sifter for? So the Gemara says, because of darkei shalom, all of the heterim that we have that the Rebbe educated us to look within halacha of how to figure out to help a yid, we do everything we could. Ani oimer, nafar, list with all the boss. The sifters to count money. The kvara is to sift sand. When you manufacture mortar, you want to have sifted sand. People don't use eating utensils for that. Could be this person wants to do that. Look how much we go out of the way to help another yid. Rechaim, maybe to grind certain herbs. Guys, anything that's made for dying, not to starben, dying as to tinturaria dying, D-Y-E, right? Is allowed. And Daf Mem Aleph, just the top line, we'll stop over here. Tanur, maybe the guy, my Isha, Hachashud ala Shviz, Litmain ba'unan shal pishtan. She has bundles of flax, and you want to dry it. Yeah, that you can do. In other words, you see over here, but kulam lo yamru elam epnei darkei shalom.
But you don't go with the majority.
No, that's the whole chiddush. You go with the 1%. You go with
but
the 1%.
But is there not some sort of use that she could have to sift this flour where it wouldn't be a violation? Why can't she make a loaf of bread for herself on Shvius?
Because we're speaking about the time, like I told you, the Marafulda says it's after the Zman Abir.
Okay.
And let's go with Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Even the Ramban.
Oh, according
to the Rambam, no one can have anything. You have to be mafked, and then you have to burn it, says the Rambam. Bazan Shalosh shows burn it. Even according to the Ramban, you're allowed to take it back. Who can take it back? Rabbi Yehuda, only Daniyim. They're Ashirim.
So if you're not usher, you can't bake any bread on Shvius.
Very good, Danny. If you're not an usher, 1 second, unless you have grain from the 6th year.
Got it.
But now you know this household, they're chshudim ala shvius. We got it. That's